Hello and welcome to episode 10 of the Political Debrief podcast. I'm your host, Josh Oliverio. Thanks so much for joining me today. On this show, our mission is to share the issues in Canadian politics and how it affects Canada's youth. Which is why I'm excited to share my conversation today with the former Minister of Inclusion, Diversity and Youth, the Honourable Bardish Chagger. We talked about a variety of topics, including youth participation in democracy, and we also heard from her about her very young start to politics and her message to Canada's youth. Here's our conversation now. I hope you enjoy it. And joining me now is the Member of Parliament for Waterloo and the former Minister of Diversity, Inclusion and Youth, and currently serves as the Chair of the Standing Committee on Procedure and House Affairs, the Honourable Bardish Chagger. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
So I like to start with all of my MPs that I interview. I like to start with this one question. Why did you become an MP?
So I got involved in politics when I was 13 years old. I think democracy is the power of the people, and whether you can vote or not, it's important that each of us has our say. I think about men and women in uniform who paid the ultimate sacrifice, who served to ensure that our democracy was strong. So I think it's really important that we engage in whatever way we desire. I never thought I would run for office, but I did have an opportunity to. I was a little bit frustrated with the government of the day. I felt that, the diversity of perspectives were not being listened to, and that one way of participating in the debate was to get more involved by putting my name on a ballot and actually just helping that discourse to give people the riding of Waterloo another choice of somebody who they could vote for. And they voted for me, and I was elected, and then I was reelected in 2019, and they sent me back for a third term in 2021. And I'm really proud of the region of Waterloo, really proud of our community. I'm born and raised in the region, so it's something that I've always known, and really just want to ensure that Canada knows that Waterloo is part of the solution. And Prime Minister Justin Trudeau often says that the world needs more Canada. I believe that Canada needs more Waterloo. And one way to do that is by making sure that the diversity of voices and perspectives and experiences within our region, within the riding that I'm elected to represent, are heard in the House of Commons. And so that's kind of how I got to where I am.
Yeah, well, you mentioned at the beginning that you started being involved in politics at a very young age. I actually did a little bit of research. And so in 1993, you were 13 and you were a volunteer for the Liberal candidate. What got you interested at that age in volunteering for an election campaign?
Okay, so real talk. I'm the child of immigrants. My grandfather immigrated to Canada in the early 70s, and then my father, grandmother, aunts, and uncle came to Canada. Then my mom came to Canada, and then I was born in Canada. And social issues are sometimes challenging, and I'm the child of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and I'm actually older than the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And so I was fighting for certain social policies that were a little bit challenging of a conversation within my family. My father had my back and wanted me to be my true authentic self and to fight for things like same-sex marriage, to fight for dying with dignity, which is today known as medical assistance in dying, fighting for the legalization of drugs, starting with cannabis, which were sometimes challenging at home. So what my father did was he was involved within the democratic process because, well, he had to be to ensure that his kids got to go to a French immersion school. He had to take on the school board. There was many different times where he needed to advocate for himself and our family. And so since he was already out putting out signs for Andrew Tlagdy, who was the candidate that he was supporting, he said, Bardish, come along with me. And so I did. And then I found a place within the Liberal Party where I could debate policies and have conversations on issues that were important to me. And then I guess not have such a contentious conversation at home, making for a more peaceful dinner. And I really enjoyed it. I got to learn so much more and I got to do so much more.
And then after that, you became, or a little bit later, I guess, you became the special projects coordinator for the Kitchener Waterloo Multicultural Center, which involved you planning and coordinating the annual Kitchener Waterloo Multicultural Festival in Victoria Park. What got you interested in that role, and how do you think it prepared you for your work as an MP?
So you know what's actually more interesting, I would say, Joshua, is that I was actually on the board at the Kitchener Waterloo Multicultural Center. And so I do think part of engaging within community is having our, volunteering within the community. And one way to do that is actually joining boards that help broaden our horizons. It might be something that you're interested in or something that you want to learn about. And the Multicultural Center had coordinated the Global Skills Conference, which was a 1 day conference for internationally trained professionals to actually get into their professions here in Canada. So I was on the board and I actually emceed the first year's conference, and then was asked to join on as a contract worker with the Multicultural Center to coordinate that conference. And we did a very good job. It was an amazing experience. There's also a conference in Toronto. So I had gone to Toronto for the day to learn kind of what they were doing to bring back some of those best practices that could work within the Waterloo region. And that's when I was given an additional project, which was the Multicultural Festival. And so that's kind of just the opportunity was there that they needed someone to kind of, I guess, come with a new energy and a new outlet on some of the work that we were doing. And then I was given that opportunity. And I was only supposed to be there for a short period of time, but I actually ended up staying there for multiple years and really enjoying the experience of helping to work with the settlement agency that was also, at risk of having funding cut because of the government of the day and so forth. Yet the need for their services weren't growing. So helping to really support them in the work they were doing, but also making sure that they were really present within the community to help the settlement opportunities that exist, but also to fight for immigrant communities. Because the reality is that internationally trained professionals come to Canada, but their credentials are not always recognized, or they don't necessarily know where to go to find related fields for them to actually contribute the skills that they bring to help make our country even better. I'm just going to jump in. I'll answer your question because the politicians, I guess, usually don't. But so how that helps is a lot of the work that I do at the federal level today really is advocating for the needs within our community. So when it comes to our immigration numbers, we're seeing a lot more people come to Canada, wanting to make sure that they are able to contribute and have their credentials recognized. A lot of this falls within the provincial level of jurisdiction, but there is the foreign credential program that's at the federal level. So providing those insights and perspectives. The Multicultural Festival, being able to work with so many different communities, yet coming together, not only to celebrate, but to learn from each other. We actually are strong in Canada, not in spite of our differences, but because of them. But we also have so much that is, in common. The fact that, unless you're Indigenous, everyone immigrated here and is coming to make our community stronger, to contribute. And everyone wants the next generation to do better than they did, right? So my grandfather never would have imagined that his granddaughter would be elected, let alone put her name on a ballot. But here we are in Canada. Anything is possible. And with a lot of hope and even more hard work, we can make things happen.
So, you're the former Minister of Diversity, Inclusion, and Youth. That was one of your many previous roles. So, with that experience, I'd say over the last 10 years, we've seen a lot more youth being engaged and involved in the democratic and political processes, not just in Canada, but around the world. But there are still many youth who aren't involved in these processes or don't have the opportunity to be involved in these processes. Do you see, or what are some of the barriers to youth participation in democracy that you see, and how do we address those?
I agree that we've seen a lot more. involvement of different generations, especially youth. And I think that's partly because, okay, so the House of Commons when I was growing up was a lot of like retired doctors and lawyers for the most part. I did not see many individuals who looked like myself within those seats. And I think we've seen that change. We have seen a lot more women being elected, a lot more people with diverse backgrounds and intersectionalities be elected. We've seen a lot younger people being elected. Like when I was elected in 2015, I was 35 years old. And people were like, "Oh, you must be one of the youngest people here." And I wasn't. There was people like a decade younger than me. And one thing that we did really was ensure that the platform that we were fighting the election with included issues that were relevant to many segments of the population, including young people. And so we also worked with Elections Canada to ensure that students on campus could vote. And oftentimes you have to like choose between your riding that you're from or where you're going to school. But there was a pilot project that was initiated, and we made sure that Waterloo region was part of it, where students could vote for their home riding at their campus. And so that actually made them not have to choose because maybe they were still linked to the community they were originally from. That's where they wanted to vote. But then sometimes they couldn't make it back home to vote. But this way they could vote on campus and make it happen. We also entered the space for Canada student loans with the interest that's accumulating. Most people don't mind paying the principal that they owe, but the interest that starts to accumulate the day after you graduate really puts recent graduates in a fiscally difficult position. And in 2004, when I graduated, I learned that the hard way because I had loans and I was told that I had 6 months to start paying them back, which was okay. But no one told me that interest was accumulating the day after I graduated. 2 days after I graduated, there was interest on top of interest. When I started paying back my loans, I had accumulated like 5.5 months of interest. And it was absolutely horrible. So I wrote a policy. And within the fall economic statement that just came out for 2022, we're eliminating interest on student loans. And so this is something that young people have been advocating for. I think young people don't always recognize how they can contribute. So, yes, you can put your name on a ballot. You can help on a campaign. If there's an issue that you are concerned about or passionate about, want to advance, you can start a petition and have people sign it. You can give it to your elected official, and whether they agree with it or not, they will present it in the House of Commons. So in Canada, if you're 18 years of age and a Canadian citizen, you can start your own political party, right? And so there's different things that I think people just don't know as to how they can get involved. And this was something that was really important to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. When we were in the third party benches, he was the critic for youth, and there wasn't even a minister of youth. And when he became Prime Minister in 2015, he kept the portfolio for Minister of Youth. And so I was the first Minister of Youth after him, so the second Minister of Youth in Canada, and we started the Youth Secretariat. And we did that through the Prime Minister's Youth Council to make sure we could understand what young people were looking for. Because oftentimes we think we know what young people want, but you know who knows what young people want? Young people. So by listening to them and engaging with them, I think we've been able to also bring them more into the fold. I think around the world, you're seeing a lot of issues, including social issues, that are being challenged. And young people are saying, we're not going to stand for this. They're going to defend their rights and freedoms, hard fought rights and freedoms. And they're stepping up. They are marching. They are protesting. They are having their say. And I think it's important. And we need to create space to not only listen to them, but to actually hear what they are saying, because they will be here in the future that we are creating laws and policies for. So it's really important that they have a say in what we're advancing.
And you touched on a couple of points that I'm going to try to combine into one question. But one of the things that you did as Minister of Youth was introduced the first State of the Youth report last year. And there are some interesting recommendations in there that we'll get to a couple of them shortly. But I guess this kind of goes to a question that I asked before. When preparing this report, how important was like consulting youth, but then how does the consultation continue after this report over a year ago? How does the government continue to consult youth on future policy or working on implementing some of the recommendations in the report?
So we have a new Minister of Youth who is very active on the file. And because as a former Minister of Youth, I will remain committed on that file. So there's actually more of our voices pushing for it. The Youth Secretariat is instrumental because it's a resource that youth and youth-serving organizations can engage in. I also want to say I come with a science background. So when I was in grade 6, I went to a day with the difference at the University of Waterloo. At that time, like we are still doing, we were encouraging more women to enter science-related fields. And that's when I decided to go into science. And something that is really important about evidence-based decision-making, and also a reason why I chose to run for office, is that you need to be able to measure something so that you can actually compare to, is it, what impact is it having? Are we improving the situation and so forth? And that's why the State of the Youth was so important. It was really about actually looking at, in a sense, a baseline, because we had never measured the state of youth in Canada and the issues that were important to them. So this is an ongoing process. You will see other states of the youth reports come out. You will see the Prime Minister's Youth Council continue to engage in these issues. You see that members of parliament across the country have, youth councils who they engage with. You'll also see youth-serving organizations who are receiving funding, who are actively involved in making sure that we're actually working with young people to address and advance what's important to them. The State of the Youth report, it puts a smile on my face, was actually written by youth for the Government of Canada and for Canadians. And that's where there were some people who had a hard time understanding that report and saying, well, it doesn't flow like your traditional report. But it wasn't meant to. It was actually meant to take into consideration what young people were asking us to do. Young people went out and engaged with fellow young people. And they also made a concerted effort to make sure that the diversity of regions, of people, of intersectionalities, urban, rural, remote, list goes on, were being represented and reflected. It was very impressive to see how young people were very concerned with other fellow young people. So they knew what their situation was, but they really wanted to advance the voices of people who too often don't have their voices heard. And they were fighting for fellow young people. And it was close to my heart because when I fought for same-sex marriages, it wasn't necessarily that I was part of the LGBTQ2 community. It was more so that I had friends who felt voiceless and did not necessarily have the ability or the supports that I did to be able to fight for an issue that needed to be advanced. And I saw that happening in another generation. And so that's why I always say to young people, like, as we grow up, as you get older, don't do the same thing every other generation has done and forget about others, right? Like, always remember this person that you are and continue advocating for. So I think the State of the Youth report is a snapshot in time, but I also do believe it's a living document that we will continue to build upon.
I want to ask you about a specific recommendation in that report that was released last year. And it actually came up for debate in the House of Commons month and a half ago, and it's recommendation 5C, which reads, urgently prioritize lowering the voting age from 18 to 16.
Yeah.
So we had a bill come up maybe 45 days ago for a vote sponsored by an NDP MP. Actually, he was the first episode that I did, and we talked about it in his perspective. So I want to get your perspective as a member of a different party, but also as a former minister of youth. You voted no on that bill. What are your thoughts about the idea, more specifically than a yes/no?
So I think it's a really important conference. So I'll tell you, I often look at what's in my inbox and what am I hearing from people who are not only directly involved on the file, but have a few degrees of separation or whatever the case might be. The number of emails I received on the topic were interesting, and oftentimes I ended up calling some of the people to be like, let's have a conversation on this so I could really understand what you're trying to share with me. Something we did when we took office, well, shortly after we did it since being elected, I guess, in 2015, is provide Elections Canada the ability to educate and inform more Canadians. Our voter turnout is, well, I guess nothing to write home about. Everybody doesn't vote. Many people aren't engaged. There are mechanisms to vote, including being, given 3 hours to go vote in paid time. Not everyone's eligible for it. The list goes on. I probably am one of very few people within my circle of friends who's involved in the democratic process. And I often try to look at issues that are important to people around me to tell them they should look into these policies of the different parties so that it can help inform who they are voting for. I often get asked who I should vote for, and I don't think that's for me to decide. So I think, if I can take time to have conversations with people, that it's important to do it. So I think Elections Canada's ability to work and educate people between the age of 16 and 18 about the electoral process and the democratic process, I think is something that we need to build upon. I think if young people unanimously said, we want the right to vote at 16, I would have an easier time voting yes. I went to an event at, I've been to a few events, including at local universities where students from across the region got together. In that room of maybe 40 youth, young people were divided on the topic. And there's people who say, well, I can drive, I should be able to vote. There's also young people who are saying, listen, I want to be engaged, but I also want to be informed, and I don't have the time to do it. So how do we actually ensure people are getting information about political parties or about people's platforms that isn't telling anyone how to vote, right? They need to choose what's important to them and why they're voting for someone. I think about when I go visit grade 5 classes, because it's part of the education curriculum, I don't take a liberal message. I don't take a partisan message. I take an opportunity to talk to young people and let them understand how they can get involved in the democratic process. Even in the campaign, I went to a classroom and, the teacher said to me, the other parties came and they told us everything about what the government wasn't doing. And you came and you kind of had a thought-provoking kind of conversation, a fruitful conversation. I said, yes, I am not going to sit there and tell young people who they should vote for. I'm going to inform them. I'm going to let them know where they can find good information. I'm going to listen to them. I'm going to engage them. But I really think that we need to not only empower, but engage young people to actually be more relevant in the process. I think political parties need to have platforms that include issues that are important to young people, and the list goes on. So I think when it comes to voting age of 16, once upon a time, and I was a minister of youth, so I know this conversation and I've seen the debate. It was really simple for me to say, yes, this is what young people want. the more I've been engaging with more young people, the more I'm realizing it's not so obvious that young people all want to vote at 16.
Well, thank you for sharing your perspective on that. I love hearing from different MPs about all the different issues, and it'll be a good thing to add on to the previous episode I did on this topic. My last question for you today is a little bit more of an open-ended one, so I'm sorry if this catches you off guard a little bit. If you had to go back to when you were 13 or 14, what is one thing you wish you knew that you know now, or what's a piece of advice that you want to give to someone that you know between the ages of 12 and 15?
So I was asked this question before. My piece of advice to young people, okay, so my world that I grew up in is very different than the world that exists today. Okay. I did not have social media. I did not have access to the internet. I did not grow up with a phone in my hand. So one piece of advice is I would be mindful of what you're posting online. I think having a pause before having a reaction is always important. Making sure that you have your information is important. And I think that's where even sometimes having a degree of separation. There's been many a times where I have, typed out an email and just saved it in the draft to say, let me see how I feel in the morning before I send it. And I think sometimes on social media, when people are out there, in the heat of the moment on a debate, sometimes things are said that are not going to go away. And I think it's really important that one, be mindful of the internet and that space and social media and just the way things can go viral. And often when you want something to go viral, it doesn't. And when you don't want it to go viral, it does. And I relate that to advice that I always received when I was younger. And it was that if you wake up in the morning and whatever you're doing was the headline of your local paper, of the Globe and Mail or whatever else, would you be okay with it? And if you would be, go for it. Do it. If you wouldn't be, maybe you want to pause and think about it. So for me, it was a print paper. Today it's social media. For myself, if I could go back, I would be definitely bolder and try more things. But I also would have, I think, I would have kept more of a documentation of my experiences and the things I've done. Oftentimes, I was so lucky and I was so privileged and so blessed to have some of the opportunities that I did, but I didn't necessarily always keep documentation to show that I did it. You might have received a certificate of participation. You might have been part of a group. December 6th, the National Day of Violence Against Women is coming. The very first year after that happened, I remember being at Sandown Public School and being asked by Madame Schmidt, and there was a group of us girls who went around classroom to classroom to explain what had happened at École Polytechnique. And I think things like that I would have kept in a little box so that I would have some of those memories and the dates marked down. Today it's different because everything's on the internet, so you can Google it and find it. In my time, it was pen and paper, and if you didn't document it, it basically doesn't exist. For us, we printed pictures. You didn't just have them digitally available. You only took pictures you really wanted to print because it wasn't easy to do, versus today you can take 18,000 pictures and then pick the one you want to use. So I would probably say I would actually take the time to process some of the experiences and then maybe keep like a little keepsake box with those memories. So I would say to young people that as you are participating in different clubs, as you are meeting different people and having different experiences, you just take a moment to either jot it down in a diary or to keep a spot where you're actually, building your resume into some of those experiences. Because as much as it might not feel like it's relevant or important, it really is. It helps to define the person you are one day. And if you choose to run for office, being able to relate to people based on experiences you have had is very important. And for me, many of those experiences came through volunteering and engaging in the community and serving on boards and helping out. And so I think I would love to have some of those memories easier to find. But right now, what happens is I'll meet somebody, they'll say something, and I'll be like, "Oh, I did that," and the memory comes back to me. But I just know as I do get older, I'm not sure if the memories will continue coming back to me as quickly. So I think just making sure that you document and keep some of those memories so that you know that you have them, and then you're able to share them with others.
Awesome. Bartosz Chager, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Joshua. This was awesome.
And that's it for this episode of Political Debrief. Thank you so much for joining me. As always, down below in the description, there are some links and resources to some information about topics we talked about today. One of those links is to the State of the Youth report that we talked about and all the recommendations and information about that, so feel free to take a look. If you're interested, as always, please subscribe on YouTube and on your favorite podcast platforms. It's greatly appreciated and helps us extend our show to other people. And as well, you can follow me on Twitter at Josh Oliverio, the show on Instagram at Political Debrief Show, and check out all the previous episodes of Political Debrief at politicaldebrief.com. If you want to reach out, you can send me an email, josh@politicaldebrief.com. Thank you so much for watching and listening to this episode of Political Debrief. Looking forward to the next episode, which will release in a couple weeks' time.